All right, Justin, we're talking about the basketball team. A lot of excitement, coming off the Final Four season. And one of the things that, feels different, essentially, when you were there in 2013, a lot of turnover after that 2013 season, whereas this team, just like we saw with the Elite Eight the year before, they bring back key guys. So they're bringing back key guys. And this is what I want to talk about. We got some topics here to talk about. The season gets going there in November. They have that exhibition game October 29th. We'll do more on that. But they bring back the three guys, the key guys, and Pack, Omir, and then Wooga Poplar. Bring in Cleveland there, and I think we're all kind of expecting Bensley to take that starting spot, that fifth spot, key guy last year. But I think with losing Isaiah and Jordan, Justin, we're going to talk about this. Who will be Miami's best player this year? Their top player, however you want to word it, or maybe it could just be who should be or whatever, because I think it's not as clear cut. And I think leading roles is such a big thing in college basketball, like who are your go-to guys. And understanding that a lot of these guys can get points and kind of maybe lead in different games. But who do you think, or who are you seeing that will be this team's best player?
Yeah, what's going on, Chris? Thanks for having me back. Very good point. Definitely think it's a big change this year. As much as I felt people didn't appreciate Isaiah, I mean, you knew who was the star, who was going to have the ball in his hands at the end of the game. And most of the time, he was going to deliver for you. So totally different now this year. Like you said, we got Wooga back, Pack, and Norchad. I think kind of got to see how things unfold. I feel like the hype of the season is around Wooga, which we understand why. I mean, he took a huge step forward last year. Hope to see another big step this year. But at the same time, in the tournament, once the hype started coming to him, he didn't really show up that last game. So I still think he's going to take a big leap forward. I think he's going to end up being the guy that is the focal point, the go-to guy. And I also find that Nigel plays really good when he is the second option. So I think that actually would work in his favor. So if you have somebody like Wooga that can look to create, you have Norchad, you have Nigel, maybe by committee, you have a group of guys that you can count on, but huge difference losing Isaiah. He was the guy that was very reliable.
Yeah, and Matthew Cleveland comes in. He led Florida State in scoring, so he's coming in looking to kind of establish himself. Certainly he can score, and there's things we can get into with his game a little bit, but it's interesting with Wooga, and that's my answer. We've not talked about this, and we've got some other topics we'll get into as well. I think it has to be Wooga, and I think it can be. I think it will be. I think, and maybe I'm putting too much into what happened in France. 3 exhibition games. Wooga led the team in scoring 20 points a game. Very efficient based on the numbers that were provided. He had a 25-point game in there. It's interesting because he was the fifth option last year. He started last year, but clearly the fifth option. He did have his moments, but as we've talked about with Isaiah Jordan and Nigel and Norchad, and those guys were proven. And yeah, so jump from fifth. Now, this is what's going to be interesting is if he's going to have to essentially, if he's going to be given that same responsibilities, or if other guys, because they're older, or maybe more experienced is the right term, because all 5 guys we expect to start are actually classified as juniors, a couple of fourth year juniors technically. But I think it's going to be Wooga, and I think the big thing with him, and I think this is going to be a big part with this team. Not only are losing the scorers in Isaiah and Jordan, but I think their ability to go get their shots, especially Isaiah, but Nigel's a guy that is at his best as a spot up shooter. Now he can do that 1-2 dribble and shoot off for 3. Norchad's a guy that you don't typically feed the post. And then Matthew Cleveland, as I was mentioned earlier, things that stand out to me offensively, we'll see how he kind of fits in. But this is a guy that shot 46% from 2 in comparison. Jordan Miller playing in that same spot, 60% from 2. So there's some efficiency things with Cleveland that he's asked to clear up, and maybe it gets better. Another year, different team, different, offensive game plans. But I think with Wooga, the ability to go get a shot, score in different ways, drive to the basket, his athleticism, knock down threes. And again, what we saw in France, or what the stats, they showed some highlights. Obviously, none of the games were televised, so we didn't actually see them. But I think it's Wooga, and I think it has to be. And I think the sooner that gets established, I think the better off this team will be. And it might take some non-conference games. It might be that big game against Kentucky. Whatever it might be, I think, if they can kind of get to that role, because I think that's what they will be at their best if Wooga does emerge as the team's top player.
Yeah, completely agree. I mean, at the end of the day, I think it's a very balanced team again for the third year in a row. A lot of different guys that are going to need to step up in different situations. So I do feel good about that. But that key guy, I agree, got to be Wooga. It's a big ask to go from the fifth option to the first, like you said, but he's shown all the signs that he can do it. So I think he's the guy.
Justin, one thing that when we were back, kind of looking back at the tournament that stood out to me was, obviously Coach Larinaga has spoken highly about Wooga, but I remember when Coach Hurley for UConn going into the game, just felt like Wooga was an NBA player. He kind of just prompted, he just felt really highly about him. He knew him from the Philly days there, when Wooga was coming up. And I thought that was, when you hear other coaches speak about players, I think that's always a big sign. I think all coaches for their own players will vouch for guys and speak highly of them. I know Jim thinks he's going to take a big jump. He has said that. He really feels like he will. And again, if Wooga went to France and kind of was more in that slotted in that 12-point range or whatever it might be, but or behind some guys, I just think I think that was a big point for him. I think if we look back, I think, as the season goes on, if he is their best player, certainly has a good season, I think we'll go back to France and see as such a jump off point for him that 20 points a game. Again, just kind of summarizes Cleveland 16, Norwich had just a touch under 16, and then AJ Casey off the bench there right at 12. So that's kind of how it shook out in those three games. It's not a tell-all, but I thought that was certainly a big jumping point for Wooga, and changed his number, wearing number 5 this year. So we will see. But I think Miami can be very good. Again, you touched on the balance, but again, Wooga, I think, is such a key part because the way his game is, if he's clicking at all cylinders like we've seen at times, I think he provides a lot for this team.
Yeah, completely agree. And some guys, I'm sure we'll get into it, but I'm curious to see if AJ Casey and Christian Watson also take big steps the way we saw Wooga and Bensley take last year.
Yeah, let's stay on that. Well, let's go with that. Who do you think will be a key reserve or the main key reserve again as we're projecting Bensley starting? So it's those other guys. You just looking at it here with AJ Casey, then you got the 3 freshmen coming in, and Michael Nwako. You got Keyshawn George and then Paul Jobe. Those guys there, also bringing back Ja'Kai Robinson and Christian Watson. So if we're touching on that, kind of those 6 guys, bench or reserves, who do you think is kind of the key? Maybe a key reserve for these guys, and you lose Harlan Beverly, Anthony Walker. Those guys move on. Those were key bench guys a year ago on that great team.
Yeah, I think it's tough because at first going into last year, it was supposed to be AJ Casey. I feel like he got the opportunity. He had the minutes in the first half of the season, and it appeared like he had some growing up to do to get ready for the college level. He came out a little soft, and then you saw maybe the coaching staff felt the same way because it shifted to Christian Watson taking more of those minutes. So happy to see Casey having some big games in France, showing that he can take that next step. But I think Christian Watson really looked physically ready. He seemed to have that motor and that mentality. And I think that'll take him a long way. So I'm excited to see him increase his role this year, get more minutes, and I think he will be one of the key reserves for sure.
I could see Casey maybe leading the reserves in scoring, like what we saw in France. I could kind of see him now, maybe not expecting big numbers, but you could see him. I think they like his inside-out game. I think it's a little. I've heard Jim compare him to a Paul George type. I don't think he's got that kind of a perimeter game. I think he's more of that stretch 4 type. He will shoot it. I don't think he has got the ball handling, those kind of skills from what we've seen. I think just my impressions of him as a player, but I could see him scoring. That was good to see. They felt like his offensive game needed to come. I think Christian Watson, and that's probably if I were to say an answer, and again, that's saying that Casey could lead this group, but I think this is a big year for Christian Watson. Didn't play last year very much, but I think this is such a pivotal year. I think he'll get the first crack, the experience being in the system. But, we touched on those 2 other guys in Jobe and George coming in and as wing players. And I think it's just really big for Watson to really stay out in front, play well, because I think if he doesn't, then I think those guys, essentially once they're ready for the college game, particularly with Keyshawn, coming over, just a Switzerland product there. I think he's a guy that with good skills, but maybe it could take him a little bit. So I think the big thing with Christian, maybe that offensive efficiency. I think that'll be something to watch, but ideally defensively, he's got some ball handling ability. I think they could do some pick and roll situations like we saw on the scout team last year, maybe helping that second unit at the point. Although I expect Bensley and Nigel to handle a lot of minutes, but I think Christian just is a real key guy for them to help solidify it. And I think one thing too, Harlan Beverly last year, that second unit, was really kind of an efficient player on both ends. Kind of, if you look at some analytics, just defensively, it stood out to me. So I think that they're going to need a defensive guy off the bench, and Watson could be that guy because of his versatility.
Yeah, I agree. And just looking at the history, I mean, we saw exactly that with Bensley Joseph. I mean, his defense got him on the court. His motor got him on the court as a freshman. Then he took a big jump after that. So I'm hoping to see the same with Christian Watson. I just think that that's what Coach L wants to see from a guy that's trying to break into the lineup. And I know that he can do that, and then hopefully build off of that.
Justin, what do you think the difference is from year one to year two for a college basketball player? Again, we're talking about Casey and Watson going into year two. What do you think that can do for a player? That transition. Just your thoughts on that.
Yeah, I think that the two biggest things are the physicality aspect. So I think both of those guys, I mean, you come in from high school, different level of strength training, different level of dieting. So I think that definitely takes 1 year under your belt to get stronger and be on that level. And then I would also say the speed of the game. So the college game compared to high school, I mean, it's night and day. And you see it. Some of these guys that just dominate high school get to the ACC and they can't figure it out. So I think both of those guys, you saw that all season last year. Something was not right, whether it was a little bit of strength or the speed of the game. But with a nice year under their belt, a Final Four, I really think that they're going to take 2 jumps in both of those areas.
I think AJ and Chris, that they talked so much about how close they were as a freshman group last year, but Danilo and Favor is also part of that. The 4 of them are all really close. So those 2 have moved on, and AJ and Chris, I think they're going to connect even closer. They'll have some minutes, certainly as it's projected. I think it'll be interesting to see how those guys develop. I was looking up, I want to make sure I had it right, but just that, AJ in particular, coach had said this basketball training facility had an article on that. He said, AJ was a guy, for example, that kind of benefited in the offseason, came in 200, 205, and now he's up around 220. And we don't talk about weights all the time and strength in terms of basketball the way we do with football, but certainly you like hearing that as he, again, he's going to be asked to guard some bigger guys. He's about 6'8", so certainly some help there. And I just want to touch on this. I want to go to this next topic, but hearing Coach talk about Nwako, a guy that's the biggest guy on the team, guy representing Team Canada at some events. So I think if he can provide some good bench minutes, playing that 5 spot, for Amir, certainly you always need that size. I know a lot of fans, we've talked about this too. A lot of fans want to see more size. Obviously we saw it ended with UConn, but Miami's still, small team pretty much, they're going to ride this out. So, okay. The last thing to get to, there's plenty to talk about this team, but what do you expect to be different with this team, this year's team? We've touched on obviously with Isaiah and Jordan moving on and kind of filling that scoring role, but are there certain areas? Is there something in particular, either a particular area, offensively, defensively, you think this team will be maybe a little bit better, maybe not as good as a year ago? Is there something in particular you're thinking right now, Justin?
Yeah, I mean, I hate to repeat it because we did touch on Isaiah and Jordan in the beginning of the show, but I really think that is such a drastic difference from the last 2 years to this year. I mean, when the game got tough and it was down to the wire, you really had 2 guys that you could rely on. It was easy. It was comforting. Those guys, not only could you depend on them, but they delivered and they were just leaders. Their emotions were always in check. Those guys just made you feel comfortable down the stretch, and Miami won some high pressure games because of them. So I do think, I know we already touched on it. I wish I could come to the table with something different, but I really think that is a huge difference. And you got to hope that Nigel and Norchad, being the older guys, can settle everyone in when you need that. I mean, Wooga, of course, as well, but I feel like those guys are the constants from last year, and hopefully they can keep the young guys calm and poised down the stretch, as Coach L always says.
Yeah, and Justin, I think what's interesting with that is I think you're going to see the scoring, the statistical, just output, pure stats is going to be fine. I think all four of those guys, I don't think Bensley will be there, but the other four I think could average in double figures. I think the numbers will be there. I think what maybe even what you're thinking about is maybe some particular moments in games, maybe what turns the corner between wins and losses. This is a team that won the ACC regular season title. You're winning a lot of games. You're doing a lot of things right to win games. And I think that will be maybe, again, not maybe the totality of points, because I think they'll all get their points. I think that won't change. And I think sometimes when we're talking about transition of a new team, oh, you're like, oh, a 15 point score, whatever it might be. And they just don't have that offensive output. But, and again, there is going to be a big difference between Isaiah's output and then what Bensley is going to provide there in backcourt, surely. But I think maybe, again, because I think they could still score 4 scores in college basketball is great to have. I just think it might be those moments. I'm going to answer this, and I just want to kind of follow with what you said. But, I think defensively, I think this is where this team could be take a step back from a year ago. I know Bensley came in with his defense, but now he's going to have that full-time role with Nigel Pack there. I think Isaiah Wong was at times a little bit of an underrated defender. I don't like the size of those two together. I know they didn't play together a ton with Nigel and Bensley, but the analytics weren't great last year in terms of them on the court together. So I think defensively there. And then also I think Matthew Cleveland, again, some analytics stuff. I think there's going to be a little bit of a drop off between him and Jordan Miller as the defender. I just thought Jordan did a lot for this team. We'll see on Cleveland. Again, new situation, playing with different teammates. Maybe he will be a good defender. So I think maybe just even those two guys kind of stepping into that starting lineup. And then defensively, I touched on, Harlan Beverly. I thought also with Anthony Walker provided this team defensively last year off the bench. Again, and kind of looking on some analytics with Harlan, he was graded as the second best defender on the team, had the second highest defensive metrics right behind Omier. So it's really not a downfall in those other guys that he was ahead of. I think it just kind of shows the kind of defender that Harlan was. So I think those guys stepping in off the bench will need to be good defenders. You can't roll out a bench and whenever they're in there, they get outscored and things like that. So I just think that'll be something to watch for. Again, I thought Miami's offense, we touched on that so much last year, was so good. But as the season went on, as the tournament went on, they showed that they could, kind of either create turnovers, whatever that might be on some matchup stuff. They weren't getting exposed down low for the most part, occasionally in games, but they did a good job with that. So I think that's going to be something in terms of that will kind of determine this team's success. Either they're going to be staying right at the top of the ACC like they've been, or if they take a step back, I think defensively will be the reason. In addition to what you're saying, Justin, in terms of those leaders, on both sides, both ends of the court there, offensively and defensively, as they try to replace Isaiah and Jordan the best they can.
Yeah, just what you said. It's not really the points that I'm referring to. It's more of how many times did we see the other team go on a run and Isaiah just come and stop the run and find a way to get a basket. And so that, I think, is the tough part. And I completely agree with you. On paper and just from us watching all the games last year, that backcourt is, I don't know, it's a little questionable. Bensley and Pack, they're both great at what they do, but combining them together, we'll see how it goes. And also to what you said about Harlan, I think he was incredible off the bench last year. Similar to what I mentioned about Isaiah. How many times did you see Harlan just come off the bench and get a bucket to stop a run or a steal? We need guys to be able to change the pace of the game and shift the momentum. So we'll see who steps up, but agree with all of that.
Yeah, it'll be interesting. And just kind of wrapping this up, Bensley's got a big role this year. I think he's a guy that, again, I expect him to be a big scorer, but, if he's coming in distributing with that top unit even more, maybe getting these guys going, he could really help those guys out in addition to hitting, being an efficient guy, spotting up for three. So a lot to talk about, Justin. We could keep going for sure. Again, hoping, I've heard people on the website say they wish there was more basketball content. Trust me, I want to provide more, kind of balancing it with football, but also if practices aren't open or there's not interviews availabilities, it's tough to provide content. So hopefully that will change. Hopefully in the near future, able to be at some practices. They did have one. I wasn't able to make it. But hopefully I'm out there because I definitely enjoy covering the team. Justin, I know we enjoy talking. So appreciate you, man. We'll talk soon. There's a lot to talk about with this team for sure.
Definitely. Thanks again. And looking forward to another big basketball season.